So, who am I? I'm a Sounders fan, I'm a husband, I'm a father of one little one named Lucy. And even though I work at Microsoft, they're my opinions and no one else's. So take it with a grain of salt. So Peter Thiel, in his book 0 to 1, it's about disruptive innovation in general, and I totally recommend it. This is a great quote. It says, "Every moment in business happens only once. The next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Larry Page or Sergey Brin will not make a search engine. And the next Mark Zuckerberg won't create a social network. If you're copying these guys, you aren't learning from them." And this is a really, really hard concept to get. What is disruptive innovation versus iterative innovation? Like they're both innovations, but 0 to 1 is much harder than 1 to 2 to 3 to 3. I definitely, there's a lot of resources on this subject. I think this is a really good one to really dive deep on. He has some kind of controversial things. Anything that you read, definitely round out and don't just run with it. But I think it's a great thought-provoking book. Why do companies change? So moonshots. Moonshots are these ideas that are bigger than life. Aerospace, crane. That's an actual moonshot. Like my examples are like people like X. The Google X projects is just full of moonshots. Self-driving cars. Internet.org for Facebook, where they're saying we want to bring the internet to everybody, and that's something that everyone can rally around. It's something that's like when Bill Gates says, I want to cure malaria. I want to, get rid of polio. Like these big ideas that people can rally around. Really says, how do we get from not just 0 to 1, but like 1 to 100,000? Like what's the 10x, 100x? Like this is so big, we're going to have to change everything that we do. This is a positive change in an organization. When Microsoft has AI to cure cancer, every organization, no matter what the organization is, especially if you're in actual aerospace, you kind of are going to like ruin my like this whole has like analogies for aerospace, and I feel like you're just going to judge me on everything that I'm saying. But so all of these, no matter what company you're a part of, you can have a moonshot, and moonshots are great ideas, and everybody can rally around it. But you might not be, if you're in a big organization, you might not be a part of that project. It's not every project is a moonshot, right? You're saying like, I want to do something great. I want to make a disruptive change, but I don't have that big of an influence. Why do moonshots matter? At an organization like if you're at Facebook, you can say that, man, we're bringing the internet to the masses. This is so good. We at Facebook are doing that. Or if you're at Microsoft, I don't actually cure cancer, but I can say that Microsoft cures cancer, and I feel great about that, even though I work on Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or we're curing cancer. And so there's this really big halo effect that's great. And the work that we do when you are going towards these things creates technology that you can use on everything else. Like we, inside of the service that I work, we use AI and machine learning all the time. Like we have MSR that are off in Toronto, Canada, or they're in Montreal, or they're around the world. They're doing basic research, and they're really trying to solve these huge problems. And as they're developing these things, they come up with new technologies that all around the company we can learn from and start to use. So moonshots are important for that aspect because there's goodness that happens, and it kind of galvanizes everybody in one direction. So having this idea that one person says we're going to get there and we're all going to rally behind it, it actually galvanizes people in one direction. So this is an example of a positive innovation that's company-wide, and people just go for it. The other example is burning platforms. It's the negative example. The most famous example, so burning platforms have come up over and over again, but it's not as fun to talk about. But it's your back is up against the wall. Things are so bad that you you have to jump. It's either jump or be burned alive. And so this is a negative experience that's starting to motivate you to just get something done. If like the moonshot is visionary, burning platforms is the oh crap moment. We've got to do something. The most famous example is Stephen Elop. Are you guys familiar with that name at all? He's probably not unless you're a follower of Microsoft News, but he was in charge of Nokia, and he famously said, Nokia is at a burning platform moment. We have to switch to the Windows Phone platform because we have to go all in because we're going to go into irrelevance if we don't, and so let's go for it. Didn't work for them, but they eventually were purchased by Microsoft, and it worked out that we wrote down the entire purchase. So it worked out for everybody involved. But these can be galvanizing moments that actually spur you on to come up with something great as well, or to be more innovative than you would have been otherwise, where you sit down with your team and you say, guys, we don't know what we're going to do next month. Like if you're in a startup, it's not the best way to motivate people. Negative motivation, it doesn't work quite as well. But if you're there and you can set up, sometimes you really are at a burning platform moment and you have a chance to say, you know what, we're not going to give up and we're going to innovate in a way that's new and exciting. I have a friend who's it seems like he works at a startup. He started a few companies, and they seem to always be at a burning platform. And they're like, what? So what's going on now? It's like, well, now we're starting. We took this tech that we developed for television tuners, and we had this massive So this is my friend. They were gonna sell these tuners to consumers, and it was great. And Windows 10 or Windows 8 had this technology where you can stream across the wire, and it was awesome. And then suddenly the next version of Windows didn't have that anymore, and they were getting all kinds of great press in CES and all of that. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And then they came up with this plan, and they pivoted to, we're going to sell this. We're going to take the technology that we have, and we're going to sell it as a package to hotels and use it to stream to all of the different rooms inside of a hotel. And so they created a new service, and it worked, and it thrived, and actually became a business that sustains some of the other businesses that they started along the way. So burning platform moments, they sometimes work and they sometimes don't, but you can use this as a motivating factor to galvanize people in a direction if you have to, if that's where it is. The better way, the Goldilocks way to do it is customer-obsessed incremental growth. So if you're always relying on rah-rah, like we got to do this is going to be amazing, or things are terrible, nobody can sustain that. That's not the way. That's not the best way to motivate a team or get going. But customer-obsessed incremental growth is what is the innovation that customers need tomorrow, and how can we build that? How can we get customer signals to build more and more? The different ways you can do it. One is really, really high energy. We're gonna put everything in the company towards something we believe in wholeheartedly, and focus, galvanize that direction the same way that we did when we went to the moon. You also just have to change when you're at a burning platform moment. And then there's this better situation where you have developed an organization that knows how to listen to customers and has innovative change that's responsive, and it's not as grandiose. But I want to walk through quickly what Microsoft's history is. A lot of people don't realize. If you're younger, you don't realize how Microsoft started. So I work in Office, and inside of Office was a massive success. They came out and they were the only game in town after they kind of put Lotus Notes out of business. And a lot of you have never even heard of Lotus Notes. And then they're just running the table, and there's this big monopoly lawsuit that happens. But along comes eventually Google Docs launches, and when Google Docs launches, this is looked at as a toy inside of Microsoft because it's, it has no functionality comparatively. It's who would ever use this? It's online only, and it's starting to get a little bit of press. This was 12 years ago, about 13 years ago now, and so this is kind of what it looked like back then. It was Web 2.0, and you can imagine this is Gmail, and then Google Docs and spreadsheets, and eventually, we at Microsoft weren't really paying attention to them. We didn't think, well, they're a search engine. What does this matter? What they're doing matter? But eventually, they start catching on, and the press starts taking notice, and they're getting mind share. And so this is kind of they say the next decade looks like it's Google's to lose. Gartner estimates that in 10 years there will be 1.2 billion people using productivity suite services. More than half of them will be using a cloud-based productivity suite of some sort. Gartner research shows Google quickly gobbling up market share in that space. It could be as high as 50%. And this is a massive part of Microsoft's business is productivity. Back then it was about a third Windows, about a third Office, and the rest was other things, and it's just like other. If you think about billions of dollars as other, a third is, we're talking about 50% of the third going away. And what happened was we stopped focusing on the user, and because we were the dominant player in the business, and Google. They had this really simple setup, and it was easy to use, and it started to gain traction in small businesses, and it started to make a lot of sense to customers, and eventually, as we started to lose this market share, the news started saying like, what's going on with Microsoft? They used to be so strong, they used to be so dominant, and now it's totally different. They talk about Microsoft's lost decade, and then we actually have this stat line where we don't make any, like our stock is stagnant for like 10 years. And so we needed something new, and then what happened? We launched Microsoft or Office 365, and this was something that back in the day everything was installed on servers. We didn't. We sold people we sold people software, which is strange. I was working with a guy, and he didn't realize that software used to come on CDs. Like these are new. He's like, oh yeah, and he didn't understand that Agile. Have you guys? There's something besides Agile. Do you guys know this? Like, there's Waterfall Method. This is the way that Microsoft used to create all of our software. We would do these things where we had a 3-year release cycle, and it was absolutely nuts afterwards because we would do this thing where we would plan for 3 years, and we'd also, when we start building, and then there would be planning, and it's like this whole thing that was happening. And we'd plan for a year, build for a year, test for a year, and then when we released it, everybody felt really great. And then they did this thing called the Office Shuffle, where everyone just went and found new jobs at Microsoft or in Office. They're like, let's do something new. What do you want to do? I want to work in Excel. I want to work on PowerPoint. You're like, okay, sure, why not? Because they weren't in this continuous release cycle. So not only when we moved over to the online experience doing continuous agile development, we didn't just change the way that we operated in like software code, but how we operated as an entire business. And that's a pretty big change for a company that's Microsoft size. And I'm not going to go through all the technical things that we did in order to make that work, but let's just say that if you it's not an easy thing to do, and over time, it took a lot of change in the organization, and a lot of little changes led up to this big change. For us, it was probably a burning platform moment. It started off as it could have been something else, but when we started seeing that Google was taking mind share and market share, and we said, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to just go off into irrelevance, or are we going to really come up with something new? And so I was part of the team that launched Office 365, transitioning from from on-premises to the cloud, and I created the admin center, and I still work on the admin center team. And then I started focusing directly on the small business sector, because that was the place where we had the most trouble, because we were really good at paying attention to really big businesses, and Google was basically eating our lunch on the smaller businesses because they were so easy to set up. And so the rest of this talk is going to be mostly about how do you drive change inside of an organization that's so large and so entrenched and 30 years old, and they have such a way of doing things that like now we have to change. And not only is it a big change that happens once, but it's a change that happens every single week or day or over time. So getting buy-in, no one gets to the moves by themselves. This is a really important thing. So no matter what you're trying to build, you can't build it yourself, especially as a PM. If you're a developer and you have this great idea and you're a startup and you're like, I'm going to be Zuckerberg and I'm going to do Facebook, okay, great, okay, that's fine. But if you want to do something really meaningful and unless you're Zuckerberg, but other than that, you typically have to have people who buy into your idea. If you're in a small startup, it's a little bit easier because you can do things like just have charisma and people trust you, and you're like, oh, this guy, he smiles well and he speaks well, and sure, they're getting traction. A lot of hand waving, but when you're in a bigger organization, it doesn't work that well, because what happens is if you're one of the, good point, if you're one of these salespeople who is really good at selling Office Perpetual, now you say, actually, now you have to sell this other thing. Or if you're in charge of, imagine you're the VP of Office, or you're in charge of one of these smaller products, and you're saying, now instead of just making this once every 3 years, you have to do this other way, and we're not sure if it's going to work. So how do you get buy-in with those people? You have to build credibility. And the way that you could do that is you start small. Small strategic wins build credibility for further investments. And I'll say this is Sputnik, if you guys are nerdy in the room and love aeronautics. If you can go and get one or two people who are very passionate about the same thing that you are, and build something really, really small. And you identify something in your company or something in the market that needs to be built. As you start building this, and you get usage at a small level, then suddenly people are like, oh, maybe this is a good idea. Nobody believes you if it's just you up talking, but if you can finally show there's a little bit of progress, then you can get higher ups to buy in. So let me talk about that experience for me. I've worked on the entire funnel for, when you talk about funnels for Office 365, I've worked on the front, building out, getting people to subscribe to Office 365 or helping them find certain things in Office 365. I worked on the admin center itself, and then I work on the help experience where people they get stuck and they need to know what to do. And then currently I work there plus on the support tooling for agents themselves. But when we started identifying that small businesses were really struggling, we did something audacious, and we said we're going to completely change the way that support is handled. And you have to understand that at Microsoft there's an entire organization that's dedicated to support. There's thousands, tens of thousands of people that work for this organization. We didn't have continuous delivery before, and so we kind of outsourced internally. We had one division for supporting all of Microsoft's products. And what that did was it isolated us from the signals that customers wanted to give us. And so we weren't as aware that small businesses were having trouble with our products until it was starting to get too late, and as we saw with Google. And so we wanted to have a better understanding of the customer. And so we said, you know what? Let's launch a skunkworks project on support, and so we took a ragtag group of kids or people, and we said we want to build this really, really tiny experience when everybody else in the company goes through a certain flow to get to support, and it's doesn't really matter the way that it used to be, but we created a new way, and we said we're going to just take off just a teeny tiny bit, just the US customers, just people with small seats, just a very small version, and we want to prove that we can listen to customers and have a better support experience and help them have a better experience with Office and use that to drive innovation inside of the product itself. And so people thought we were crazy. They didn't know we were doing it, so that was helpful. So when we launched this, we started building and innovating, and we had a support tool that the agents would use that was completely different than the support tool everyone else would use. We found these agents who were that were like just not on the street, but they weren't a part. They had no idea how we used to do Office support. We built both the front end where the people would come in and the back end, and on a daily basis we would not only watch the metrics as people were going through, but also look at we would listen to the calls and say, like, what do we need to build for this experience? And over time we would start learning these things about what we needed to build into the product, and so we would build little innovations that convinced people that what we were doing would work. So we found what's a pain point that most all of our customers have, or a big percentage of customers have, not all of our customers, but if you're coming to Office 365 and you're having an issue with Outlook connecting to Exchange and you're not getting your email, that's a really big problem, and it's a really big satisfaction issue. So we used data to start understanding like what the biggest pain points were, and then we said, how can we develop tools or diagnostics to say, this is how you fix that problem, here you can do it yourself, or we started to actually fix the problem for them at a touch of a button. And so we built this experience first on the web. It was completely outside of the admin center. It was the first time that you could run any kind of Office code out in the wild. Like, it was just this web page you could find, and we were like, all right, let's try this. And people had no idea we were doing this. And so we had engineers who were that were building this diagnostics and these tests, and they're running it. And we started to see that people were being successful in this, and so we started to see a support case drop for this, and so we started to build credibility, say, like, okay, if this worked for Exchange, what if we did the same thing for licensing, or we did this other? As we did that, we came back to the product team, and we said, the product teams that owned each of these different experiences, and said, if you fix this, then we can prove to you that this customer will be much happier, and that you'll get fewer support calls, and then we have a higher retention. And whereas before they wouldn't have done anything, they wouldn't have paid attention to us at all, but we started to say that our small wins are good for you. When you are trying to influence and get somebody else on board, the way that you get buy-in is finding out what is the most important thing to that person. There is a secret to influencing people, and it's just finding the thing that they care about the most. And each organization has a set of values that are unique to them. For us, our organization really we cared about satisfaction, people leaving, or people having a bad experience, or the cost of helping them. And so we could go to these organizations, these different parts of the company, and say, I can solve your problem, and I've done it before, and I can do it again. And so we started doing that. Like, other organizations speak in different languages, so and it's at micro level as well. My opinion is that those guys are a really design-driven organization. The things that they care about the most is, like, what is the user experience like? Like, how does this affect the overall flow? Above all else, if you ever watch the CEO give any kind of talk, you just like, this guy cares about user experience. And so you could, I'm generalizing here, but in an organization like that, you might come out with them with numbers, and you could show them all these different things. But if you don't speak the language of design, or how this affects user experience, it'll fall on deaf ears. And so as you're trying to communicate with people in different organizations, keep that in mind. Or as you're coming to an individual, like, what is the thing that person cares about the most? If you don't like getting buy-in, then you won't like being a PM. I'll just say that. And if you have to figure out the best way to approach a person. And sometimes when you're trying to sell an idea, it can come you can try 1,000 different things, and then suddenly something works. Something suddenly works. At Google, there's this. It's very organic. It's very me to you. I've got this idea. Let me pitch to you, and then it kind of runs with it. And have you guys ever seen the organizational chart where it's like? That's really famous. Microsoft's not like this as much anymore, but there's like all Microsoft's pointing guns at each other, and Apple has there's a red dot in the middle, which represents Steve Jobs, and there's all these people in a circle around him, and then Oracle has like there's one person at the top, and then there's the product, and then this massive thing is lawyers, because all they do is so. That's I mean, it's a little bit of a caricature, and with Google, it's just like this mess of a network, and you're like, what is going on there? And I talked to some friends who went over there, and they're like, yeah, it's really hard to get anything done because there's no unifying. There's like, what do you want to do today? Oh, let's do it, and everything's 20% time to them, and. So if you're trying to get people on board, you have to consider that. And when I was, I remember I had this great idea, and I can't tell you what the great idea is because it's under NDA. But I've been trying to get it done for weeks or actually months, and I was talking to this group and that group and this group, and eventually this person just flat out told me, he said, listen, if my manager doesn't tell me to do it, I'm not going to do it. Because and then my light bulb came off, and I was like, because that's the way the organization was set up. All they at that time, and the organization that I was dealing with, they just command and control this to this to this to this, and then all right, this is how I get my rewards or my bonus at the end. And so I was like, okay, sounds like I've got to sell your boss on this idea, and that's where I started to learn about escalations. Escalations are great. Escalations, like, let me just put your manager on this thread. This is awesome. And then if you can't figure something out between each other, then you keep escalating. And eventually Satya's like, you guys knock it off. Satya's the CEO of Microsoft. But really, you do have to figure out what the motivating factor is for people. And so that happened a few times. And when I was, so more recently, besides when I was working in, on this first project where we really disrupted support, I was trying to get this new idea through. And like I said, I've been doing it for months. And so what I did was eventually I went to, we have hackathons at Microsoft where you can develop, you have a week to build something. It's awesome. If your company does it, please do it. Some people at Microsoft don't do it. It's like they give you free food. It's awesome. You work with people around the company. So what I did was I said, you know what, I've been trying to get this thing built for a couple months. Nobody's building it. So I'm just going to go and find random people through the company and pitch them on the idea. Just find somebody who's excited about the idea, because it's an exciting idea. And everybody's got this week to do it. And so I did. We went and built this amazing prototype, and we created a video. And then at the end of the week, everybody was talking about the projects that they did. All these folks were working on projects internally, and they were great, and I was really proud of them as well. And then I came back, and I was like, here's the project that didn't tell anybody at the lower level, but I was like, this is the thing that I've been trying to get you guys to build. And I showed this video, and so it's like an all-hands meeting. So there's a lot of people there from the organization, but it's higher up levels. And the guy's like, oh man, this is a great idea. Like, let's build this. And so you get on, and then everybody in the room is like, oh yeah, we love this idea too. We've loved it the entire time. Like, yeah, you guys are jerks. You did not. Mostly it was because I made a really good video, like when it came down to it. And it might have been that you're really good at talking to people one-on-one, or maybe you're a good email sender. You probably won't get a lot of work done as an email sender. That's not actually where the work gets done, but sometimes that's where you get commitment or whatever. There's a lot of different ways that you can get buy-in, but you have to sell it as well in different ways. And so you have to think about it in a what have I already tried, and what haven't I tried? Look at your organization and start saying, like, who's getting something done in this organization and what are they doing differently than what I'm doing? And so we had folks who were dedicated to the old way of doing things, and then we said, all right, we're going to carve off parts and start working on the online services, and how do we change that infrastructure? And it was helpful because for us, it came from the top, and so with the way that Microsoft is top-down driven in a lot of ways, that's a galvanizing force. We had a burning platform moment, for lack of, because that's the metaphor I chose, so that's the best metaphor. But when we came in, so we have a development team. So one of my previous roles at Microsoft, we had a development team, and they preferred to develop in a certain way, a certain cadence, and it wasn't like as different as Waterfall versus Scrum versus Kanban or something like that. We operate on like 4-week sprints, and like we kind of deliver what we want to deliver, and then there was others in the organization that said, like, no, we need to have a really good structured approach to this. And what we did, it's the same methodology where if you can prove to them that it's better to do it your way in some way. And so for us, what we did was we started tracking the amount of deliverables people were actually getting done. So they might take in like 45 user stories, just for instance, and then we say, okay, this month we're going to do 45. That sounds great. Okay. And then you get to the end of the month and you say, well, how do we do? 14. Okay. If you weren't measuring it before, there's no baseline. And so you have to set a baseline and say, like what's improvement? What is improvement? If you're not looking, if you don't know, then you can't improve. And that's the same. So prior to this role, I was working in the help and support experience, and it was the same kind of conversion where Microsoft used to put we used to write a bunch of books, and we just published them, and there's books that are the same as CDs, right? Like nobody has those anymore, but you would publish the book along with the CD, and then you'd go on to the next one and the next one. And so this is the same kind of cultural change when you move to websites, and then we're like, actually, do people come to our sites? Like, we don't know. 7 years ago, we didn't really use Google Analytics a lot as Microsoft because we're Microsoft. So this wasn't really ingrained in who we were, and so we had to build a signal. Before I came to Microsoft, I had a background in SEO and tracking people, how are websites doing and how do we do, and there was none of that when I first showed up, and I said, well, let's get this stood up and figure out what people are doing, what are people doing when they're on the page. And so when you walk into the room and you say, guys, this stuff sucks, you got to make all this better, you're like, no, well, says you, right? But if you come in and you say, well, if you look at this page that has 100 hits and then nobody goes down the page because it's all cluttered and nothing gets clicked and they bounce off immediately, and then this page has 100 page views, but everything's getting clicked, and it's because it's in a better design. Like, oh, we should do that. And so, we used A/B tests and all that to start experimenting. But if there's no data around it, then it's your opinion versus their opinion. And so, if you're trying to create change in your organization, no matter what it is, get currency that they agree on. For us, it was support, like helping people through the support funnel. It might be page views. It might be agility, like how fast do we actually deliver things? Do we deliver on time or not? Figure out what currency they're talking in, get that currency, and then present it back to them and say, this is exactly what you're asking for, and how can we do better? And then you're on the same page and you're working towards the same goal. It's not adversarial. It's really, really hard to affect change with, if you're trying to, so I work in a highly matrix organization, which is a really fun corporate word, which means trying to work across vertically or horizontally. Like, I'm in one organization and then there's 5 organizations that you have to influence in order to deliver something. That's really, really hard. And especially if one of the people pretends like they pretend like they're working with you and they're not, and they're actually doing something else. And how do you navigate that experience? And that's old school Microsoft, the way that that you see it, like the guns, like that doesn't happen very often, especially since Satya's come on, but it does happen occasionally, and it happens in any organization where there's something political going on. I'll use the P word. And so how do you affect change in an organization that absolutely, so there's one thing if you're ever, it's a base level, everyone is neutral to the whatever you're trying to get across. Oh, we don't know. Sure, that sounds better. Easy, right? What happens if you're trying to affect change and people don't want to change and they have something to protect? Now the leaves are coming up, and you have to do the same thing, but you have to get people on your side other than the team that is there. So it's the same microcosm as if, like me, just trying to convince these folks on my immediate team to do something. So when we were developing tooling for the entire support or infrastructure, and those folks, they have a vested interest in doing keeping their jobs and what they were doing before. And change is really, really hard. The human elements, this is the hardest thing to get across to people who are used to working in software. Because if you make a change on a website, then it changes immediately. If you're trying to get people to change, it takes a long time, whether that's behavior or opinions or whatever. And so we have this, once we took the support infrastructure and started building it inside of Office as the engineering team ourselves. We're the product team, now we're support, and then if you're this other, it's an existential threat. For them, it's a burning platform moment of another kind, but they feel like, oh, now I have to protect myself, and it can be really, instead of being in a company and you're feeling very open and let's work together, then people are like, well, I used to make support tools, now you're making support tools, like we shouldn't both be making support tools, and you're doing a great job, what does that mean? There's an adoption curve for anything. So are you guys familiar with the adoption curve, the early adopters? Yeah, and so you have the people who are the fast followers, the early adopters, then the massive population, then the laggards, then the people that just have to come. And your best bet if you're trying to get people on board with what you're doing is to find the people who will follow you on the fast track and say, okay, it will take so much energy to get this whole group to follow you. Just find somebody in that group that will try it, and then prove it out to them and show that you're a friend and not a foe, or whatever goal you're trying to get towards. You're like, actually, we can work together towards this. Be more conciliatory in your terms and in your tone than adversarial. Oftentimes, when you get into these conversations, the other party is they're very defensive, and you want to react defensively, and you want to say, oh yeah, well, ours is better than yours, obviously, and let me just go and escalate for no reason. If you start hitting a wall, don't try to push through the wall. That's not the way. You never win that, because you just get worn down. Find the crack in the wall, or the friend that's opening the window for you, and say, hey, have you heard about this thing? It's like, oh, that's a great idea. There's always somebody who thinks your idea is great. and there's always, it's really funny. Take that person out to coffee. Take them out to, just go, don't send them an email. Just oh, what do you think about this? And just have a conversation with them. You go, oh, do you think your team would like to try this? Oh, yeah. Well, we'd love to build a feature for you. Great, okay. What's your scenario? Okay, yeah, we can do that for you. So, and as you start building, and you start again building trust over time on these features that these guys really want, then they say, oh, okay, they're on my team, we're delivering results, I don't feel so bad. There are some people who will never be on your side. And eventually, it's just, people who I'm trying to think of something that's really gone out of style, I can't wear a fanny pack anymore. No matter how much I want to, I can't because society won't let me. You get made fun of, and the same is true, the same happens in your organization. After a certain point, you can't choose to not have a cell phone. And you can't choose not to buy into this thing because everyone in your whole company is already doing it. So rather than, if the person that won't do it is the CEO, then it sometimes doesn't work. But if it's just another organization or something like that, don't try to fight the battle with those people. Go find people who are your friends, and eventually make all the friends. Then they don't have any They don't have any people who are friends of them anymore, and they're on your side, and they're like, well, I guess what are you going to do? Say no to the thing that's working, and eventually they just have to go along with it, and that actually kind of works, strangely enough. Okay, so the question is, how did it work? It worked pretty well. Microsoft stock's doing awesome. One of my main goals of coming and chatting with folks here at Product School is, oftentimes when you look, the product manager discipline has evolved significantly since I started. There wasn't even a word product manager, 10 years ago, and Microsoft calls them program managers, not because of like programs like it's programming managers, like people like Excel is a program, and someone has to manage that program, Excel. And then they're actually, we should call that products. And so anyway, if you're ever wondering, you're looking at Microsoft job listings, that's what's going on. But there was no like guidebook to how to get started as a product manager. And I think now that there's a real cottage industry, there's a lot of different resources that are available. Product School is one of them. We have meetups, networking, etc. But then there's the question of, okay, now I kind of know UX, I kind of know a little bit of business, I know enough to get dangerous and maybe get my first job as a product manager. Now what? What's the next level? When you think of, so if you're not in product management, you're thinking about how product management works and what are the different levels. At Microsoft and generally at organizations, you have, when you're new, you own this really small area, and then you don't really have to influence a lot except for who's on your team. And then when you get to a more senior level, then you're influencing your immediate team and maybe your sister teams. And then as you grow in seniority, you keep growing, and you're like, well, who teaches me how to do that extra, everything else after just getting the job? And so today, and as we do things like this, and I think there's seasoned product managers that do this on a weekly basis. That's what we're trying to do, is help you guys like answer the questions of like what's next. So thanks so much for listening. I hope it was helpful.